Hi everyone, and welcome to today's video. In this video we're going to take a look at IDA Pro, and specifically we're just going to spend a few minutes getting used to opening up, loading files, and taking a quick look at the interface. In the next video we're going to actually spend some time getting used to the desktop and working within IDA. So this is really just to help us quickly get up and running. In addition to that, we're also going to take a look at the VM that we're going to be using and just getting kind of familiar with some of the tools that are going to be available in there. So to start off with, just how does IDA work? Well, it's a program. You'll see that within your VM, it's going to be a quick launch icon that you can just click it, open it. I'm also going to move it to the desktop, and you'll see why I do that here in just a moment. In addition to that, we're going to talk about and take a look at in the iLab on the VM, and of course you can do this anywhere you'd like. But we're also going to take a look at where you can download IDA. So if you'd like to just essentially create your own virtual machine or your own environment for looking at these binaries that we're going to look at through the semester, you're more than welcome to do that. The version that we're using in IDA is still freely available. There are actually two versions that we'll look at. So when you launch IDA, then this is usually where it starts. Right here you'll see this About screen. And you'll have some license information, and you can just generally click OK and skip that. With the freeware and the demo versions, you'll see slightly different than the one that you see here, and that I'm using the licensed version that I have for my MacBook, and I'll kind of go back and forth between the two. As we're getting started, I'll stick with the version in the iLab, and then as we kind of get more familiar with the interface, I'll probably stay out of the iLab and just use the licensed version that I have installed locally. From there, the next screen, and you'll see that on the slide here to the right, is you'll have these three options: New, Go, and Previous. And what you can do here is, if you want to start a new file, you simply click New, and that should open up a file open dialog, and the ones that you're used to with opening files in Windows. And from there, obviously navigate the file system, find the file that you want to open, and go ahead and open that. If you want to click Go, that just opens up IDA with nothing loaded. So you're just kind of free to work for the desktop and do what you need to do there. Previous is to pick essentially a previous project, and you can see in that right screen capture that I have a list of IDBs. We'll talk about the database here in a minute. IDBs as well as executables that I've loaded up, and so you can select one of those and click Previous, and that will just simply open up that file or that database from something that you've done previously, something that you previously opened. Okay, once that happens, then what IDA is going to do is it's going to present you with another dialogue and get into the reading. The readings aren't too heavy here to get started, and it'll give you a little bit more insight into actually what IDA is doing. And it's got a series of loaders, and those loaders are going to try to identify the type of file that you're trying to upload. And I want to just detour here for a moment and talk about the project that we'll eventually get to. And that project is going to be to parse the portable executable file ourselves. And the reason that we do that, the reason I think there's value in doing that, is because it helps for a variety of things. And I'll point those out as we go through the semester. But one of them is just to get a slightly better understanding into what IDA is doing, some of the work that IDA is doing under the hood, and that it's looking at that binary format, that binary data, in order to tell what type of file it is. So that's just one reason in which we're going to work on that project. So hopefully that will help so that it just makes a little bit more sense when we're actually writing the code and digging through that PE file format. To get back to the dialog here at hand, what you're seeing here then is that IDA has gone through using its loaders, using the software itself, to identify the type of file that you're trying to load. In this case, you see portable executable PE, you see MS-DOS executable, and then you see binary file. And pretty much everything we're going to work on and that I'm going to give you this semester is going to be PE, portable executable, which is another reason we're going to do the project one. As we get into the portable executable, you'll also see why, and hopefully understand a little bit more why the MS-DOS executable is there, just because PE is an extension of that MS-DOS format. And then the last option is binary file, and that one we won't be using, but if you didn't know what you were dealing with and IDA wasn't able to identify it, then you would choose binary file, and you've got a little more work to do there, and the book goes into a little more detail about that option. In general here, and pretty much a good rule of thumb here for the semester, excuse me, is that the default options, what IDA detects, you're probably fine to go with. I'm not going to throw any sort of curveballs or special use cases. If I do, I'll make sure that I point those out and walk you through exactly what to do with those. So for the most part, you'll be able to just go with the defaults that IDA detects. So In this case, portable executable, there's a variety of other options here, processor type and some others. Again, we're not going to have to deviate from those options. We're going to let IDA do that work for us, and so we won't spend a lot of time looking at those. This next slide is just simply that load file dialog for a different file format. In this case, you can see ELF for the Intel 386, so an executable file that was compiled on a Linux operating system, and IDA went ahead and identified that so that it can, really what it's trying to do here is that it needs to understand that file format, whether it's a PE, whether it's ELF, whether it's whatever it's looking for. It needs to understand that because it needs to be able to find the instructions, the executable instructions, so that it can display those to us so that we can understand what the program's doing. And there is a big distinction between those executable instructions and then just plain data. And if IDA starts to disassemble the wrong thing, then we're not going to get a good disassembly, and our analysis is going to be wrong because we're not looking at the actual instructions. So that's why this is a very important first step. And again, just to stress, we're not going to need to deviate. IDA is going to be able to detect this for us. Okay, so IDA does a couple things then from here. The finer details, which are a little less important, but still I think it's important to just to get a general understanding of what's happening. Once IDA's determined that file format, then it's going to load that executable into memory and then analyze relevant portions. So this is another reason when we get to the project one why we're doing that, is so we have a little bit better, a little deeper understanding of what IDA is doing for us here, and really what an operating system loader is doing as well. That is, you want to execute a program, the loader is going to load it into memory and begin execution. Well, IDA in a lot of ways is acting like that loader, in that it's reading that binary data on disk, that file that you gave it to parse, and then it's going to map sections, it's going to map that executable into memory and then begin analyzing it. It's going to determine what are instructions, what are data. What IDA is ultimately doing is creating a database, and once that file is loaded and parsed by IDA, then we don't need it anymore, at least not for that project that we're working on within IDA. We have a database in IDA, and that's what now we're working with. We're working with that database. So IDA goes ahead, it loads it, it parses it, it creates a database. And once all the analysis is done, we have that database. Now, the database is actually composed of a few files, and we're going to take a look at that here on the desktop in just a moment. But you'll see the name of the executable that you opened, and then .ido or .id0, .id1, .nam, and .til. And these are a proprietary format to IDA, and for the most part, I wouldn't touch them. I would recommend not to touch them because likely you'll corrupt them, and then your work will be gone. It'll be lost. They're all out there, so all those files are visible and available when you're working on a project. And once you're done and you close IDA, and we'll take a look at that dialog in just a moment, you're going to have the opportunity to save. And what it's going to do, it's going to archive. So it's going to take all these files and put them into a single file, and then also you have the option to compress. And that file, whether you archive or archive and compress, it's going to have a .idb extension, and that's your IDA database. That's generally what when you see reference, when I reference your IDA database, that's what I'm talking about. I don't want you to send all these files individually. I want you to send that final .idb. If you were working with another analyst, another reverse engineer, you would do the same. You would send them the .idb and not these individual files. Let's see. Yeah, covered all that. So we're good to go there. Okay, so as I mentioned, job of the loader, the modules, then there's, if you got into more of the inner workings of IDA, you'd see that there are different loaders for the different modules, the different formats that are available that it can detect. It's going to create the different program sections, and those sections we're going to look at in the project, the text section, the data sections, and some of the others. It's going to make sure, it's going to map that, it's going to identify entry points into the code, and then once it's done all that, it actually will hand the work, the loader now will hand the work back over to IDA, and IDA will now go ahead, it'll determine the virtual memory layout, and it will start parsing those instructions. So it'll, based off of that processor type, which we select here, or we just go with the default, then IDA is going to go through, oh, here we go. It's going to go through and it's going to essentially determine the type of the instruction, the lengths of the instruction, and the location to go next. Once it's done all of that, then it does a second pass, and that's what actually generates the assembly listing, what we see. Again, it's doing all of this in the database at this point in time. Additionally, it's going to do things like compiler identification, looking at identifying functions and function arguments and local variables and possibly data types. And this is going to vary pretty drastically based off of the version of IDAPRO that you're using. I'm going to have the latest version, so at the time of this recording, that was 6.9 just came out, and I'll use that every once in a while. You'll have maybe the free version or the demo version. The free one is what we have inside of the IA lab, which is a version like 5.0. And so it's going to be different based off of the version that you're using. So you're going to see slight discrepancies depending on which version you're using. But it shouldn't be anything too bad, and of course, if you run into any problems or something's just not making sense, you get lost inside the file, send me an email, hit us up in Slack or something, and I'll help you out. Okay, the last thing you'll do here today, and I encourage you to just kind of go through all these steps here as I demo them in the IA lab, is to close the close IDAPRO and save your database. So you need to save your work. And I can't stress that enough, because IDA sometimes crashes, sometimes fails, sometimes those databases, for whatever reason, they get corrupt. And so you need to be very careful. So I would recommend saving frequently. IDA is not like a Microsoft product. It doesn't automatically save from time to time. So the only time your database is saved is when you go and click save yourself. So no autosave. If you close the database, if you close IDAPRO and you tell it to save your database, and it does that, and you still see those 4 files in your project folder or on your desktop, wherever you're working, there might be something wrong. And so it doesn't hurt at time to time as well to just make a backup of your IDA database. Once you have an IDB and it's a good safe spot, just copy it off or archive it out. Last semester didn't run into too many problems, but I did have a few students that got they had some corruption issues with IDA and lost a little bit of their work. So just be cognizant, be aware of that, and just be prepared if something goes wrong, that you're able to either resort to a backup or able to recreate the work. I hope it doesn't happen, I really do, but it is software, and it's a little bit out of our control. So with that, I'm going to jump over to the IA lab. I'm going to do that through a Windows VM, just because I can get full screen resolution through here instead of my MacBook. And this is going to be our VM that we'll be using. And so I was going to demo that in the last video, but just ran into some issues with updates or something. So we'll spend just a few minutes on that right now, and then also take a look at getting into IDAPRO. So you'll see here there's quite a bit of tools that I already have preloaded down here. If you right-click on the desktop, you'll also see, right-click on a file, you'll see some context menu options that I've added. I'm using this VM for both malware analysis and reverse engineering. So a lot of this stuff we're not likely going to use this semester in 444. No big deal. If you're more than welcome to play around with them if you want, but a lot of these things are just we're not going to use. But I wanted to have a base VM because there are still a handful that we are going to use. IDAPRO, you can see quick launch right here, as well as moving it to the desktop. And I actually like this on the desktop just because for opening a file, what I like to do is just drag and drop it onto the icon, because then that loads that specific file up for me right away, and I think it's just a little bit easier, generally a little bit faster, but that's up to you. You can download your own version of IDA. You can read in the book. There are different licenses that you can acquire. IDA itself is pretty expensive. I'm not entirely sure what my license cost, but it was easily over $1,000. So likely you won't be doing that. But I mean, if you've got the budget or the employer, then by all means. HexRays is the company, the business that builds IDAPRO, and if you go to their site and go under products, you'll see that they have IDA, they have the HexRays decompiler as well as some training. Under IDA, you'll see what is IDA all about, and in this first paragraph here, you can click the evaluation version. So right here, demo and freeware. Okay, so we're running in the IA lab, we're running IDA 5.0 freeware. Free for non-commercial use. IDA demo download is a limited time evaluation. It's the most recent version, or a much more recent version. I think it's the most recent version, demo 6.8. So not quite the most recent version, but much more recent than the 5.0. There is a big drawback, a big caveat, so please pay attention. IDA demo does not allow you to save. So if I say for lab 1, you're going to load this binary, which we'll look at in a separate video. We're going to load it into IDAPRO, you're going to mark up the database, and I want you to submit that database. If you decide to download the demo version, install that, and run that, it's not going to create a database that you can save. So you need to be very careful with that. It's not a bad idea to have, maybe have the demo because it is a more recent version, but you are going to run into that primary limitation. It's limited time. I don't know when it expires. I've actually played around with one that did expire, and I reset my system clock, and it took that expiration away. But anyways, the freeware, this is going to give you, and again, you'll see it in just a moment, everything you need. You're going to be able to create a database, save it, and everything. So just be aware of that if you decide to deviate from the IA lab. Okay, so as far as launching, either way, here's your splash screen. You can see there's the freeware version. You can say don't display it, but every time it's going to display it. Right now the help's popping up. I'm not entirely sure why. If you figure out how to shut that off, go ahead and do that. You can see here for this particular, on this machine here, I've already loaded a couple of different tools just to make sure IDA was working fine. So here are those options: new, go, and previous. In this case, if I say new, this older version is going to give you this PE executable, dynamic library. It's just going to give you those different formats. And you can see here, Windows, DOS, Unix, Mac, OS 10 is Mach O executable. And if you select PE executable, then you'll have the ability to find a binary. Okay, so in this case, I just put the lab1 binary file on the desktop, so the md5 hash.binary. And you can click open. And now this version here is going to give you a wizard. So you can just go ahead and click through that, and it should load up and go through that process that we talked about earlier. What you're doing here though is you're kind of waiting, because you're going to see some activity. I primarily look at this bar right here. We'll talk more about this bar in the next video. But as long as you're seeing activity there, you know that it's still parsing. So you just kind of want to hang out for a minute or two, however long it takes to finish its work. And then once it's done, you're going to have some default windows, a default desktop that it's going to show you. Okay, as that's doing that, what we can take a look at here is the desktop. So here's that original file, so the md5.binary. And now here are .id0, .id1, .nam, and .til. Okay, so those are those 4 files for the database. So whenever you have IDA open and you have a project open, you're going to have those database files open. So again, it might be easier for you if you want to just create separate folders for the different projects, the different labs that we work on throughout the semester. Okay, from here, when we close it, okay, you'll be presented with the Save Database option. So if you say don't save the database, click OK. Those database files go away and you've got nothing. So now if you want to open that back up again, open this binary back up again, you're starting from scratch. So we can do that, and this time I'll just take the file and I'll drop it right onto IDA Pro. Okay, and now these screenshots will match up a little bit more with what we looked at in the actual slides. I'll minimize those. Okay, so there's the load new file dialog, just like we saw. So PE Intel x86, and we can leave all the defaults. So we click OK, and again, IDA will do its work. Okay, you can look at sometimes this output window down below here, as well as some of this status space down on this bottom bar. It can give you some insight, some indication that IDA is still working on analyzing the file. All right. Okay, as far as the desktop, there we go. So you'll see something like this. We'll talk about views, we'll talk about all these windows here in the next video. Just want to get you comfortable with opening and loading files. Okay, so now this time I'll close it, and you have some options. So you can say don't save the database like we did, and you'll lose all your work. You can not check that, and now you're going to be saving the database. So you can say don't pack, you can say pack, or you can say pack database deflate. So the default is to pack database store, and that's usually the option I go with. So anything that I'll ask you to submit, anytime I ask you to submit an IDA database file, that's the option that you can go with. Okay, now we click OK, IDA closes, and now we have the name of the file. So there's the MD5, and you can see it's .idb. So there's that .idb that I was mentioning earlier. So this is, like for lab 1, this is what I'm looking for you to submit, is the actual IDB file. Okay. All right, I think that's it. So we'll get into IDAPRO next and start looking at the desktop and looking at different, some navigation, some of the windows, and starting to build some familiarity and comfort with it. The IDAPRO tool itself can be pretty daunting, relatively intimidating here as you first get started, especially if you've never used it or never looked at it before. But don't worry, we'll hopefully get plenty of time, plenty of practice with it, and definitely build some confidence and some comfort there. Follow the readings, take a look at those, look at the screenshots, try to build a better understanding conceptually what's going on. I think that'll help go a long way in understanding the tool. And then just keep in mind, we're going to use IDAPRO for the next 16 weeks. Pretty much every lab we will work on, even when we switch over to dynamic. There will be portions of it that you can complete or that you can assist yourself with using IDAPRO. And so we're going to get some time using it. So, all right, that's all I've got for the video. Thanks, and I'll talk to you guys in the next one.